Welcome to you all. It's good to have you here this evening for this extraordinary subject about faith in the marketplace. I guess no one could have predicted just over a year ago the kind of issues that title arouses in all of our thinking, faith and the marketplace. So much has happened in the last year. I sat in a cafe with a man about 6 months ago, and he told me that in the previous 6 weeks he'd lost £1.3 billion. I sat with him in the same cafe about 4 weeks ago, and he had a smile on his face, and he told me he'd made it all back again. So there was that blip, and everybody said the world's going to be a different place and we have to reinvent ourselves. And yet we've come to this place, and the question is, have we reinvented ourselves, or has the market semi-recovered, and do we all go back to the way things were and carry on blindly? I read an article just a few days ago that talked about the lack of values in the marketplace. Of course, that's not true. We all have values. The question is, are the values we steer our city by values that are worth investing in? We all live by faith, even if it's only faith in the bank. So the question for us all is, are the things that we're putting our faith in worth putting our faith in? And what are the implications of all of that? And I think we've got a really distinguished panel to help us explore the interaction between our market economy and the issues of values and faith, and the impact that the way we are has on our globalised world. We are not autonomous individuals. The UK is not an island anymore. We're part of a global economy, and our actions impact the rest of the world within moments. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to put your hands together to welcome Mr. Ken Costa.
Yesterday, the Prime Minister described the financial markets as ideologically bankrupt and remarked in his speech at the Labour Party conference that markets needed morals. But what ideology? And where do morals come from? Now, issues of ideology and morality are important to people of faith and the subject of regular comment within our communities. We know that it's not possible to work effectively in a market or a job which does not attempt to reflect the values of our faith traditions. We therefore have a duty to take this debate forward and to be serious that the values which we regard as important are advanced amongst companies and amongst financial institutions. I mean, there's clearly a widespread anger amongst the public at large at the causes of the financial crisis and its consequences, which the Prime Minister alluded to. These must be addressed. Coming from a Christian perspective, I believe that the market economy is a very good servant, but a poor master. It needs to be infused with the values that promote the common good. My starting point is this, that religious faith is going to play an increasingly significant role in the future. And it's not only people of religious faith who recognize this. The atheist, though not anti-religious philosopher Julian Baggini, has written that those atheists who insist on talking about the decline of religion as the inevitable result of greater education and understanding now look less and less like sober rationalists and more like blind ideologues, such as the die-hard socialists who insist that capitalism's last legs are simply longer than once thought, or the apocalyptic millenarians who blame our poor date-keeping for the failure of the world to end. And Peter Berger, the American sociologist, has said that we don't live in an age of secularity, but we live in an age of explosive, pervasive religiosity, and I think he's right. The secularization thesis is now widely discredited, and Europe is currently the exception Perhaps it is completely out of step with the rest of the world, and in that sense, Europe appears locked into the past. And in their recent excellent book, God is Back, John Micklethwaite, the editor of The Economist, has argued that the proportion of people attached to the four world great religions, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, and Hinduism, has risen from 67% in 1900 to 73% in 2005 and expected to go to 80% by the 2050. It is clear that rumors of God's death has been greatly exaggerated and that The Economist got it wrong when they wrote God's obituary in their special issue for the millennium in 2000. We live in an era of globalization, of political, economic, and social interdependence. We're part of a global community. On the whole, globalization has been very positive for us. We've been able to use the power of the market to create wealth on an international scale, to alleviate poverty, and to grow fledgling economies into robust ones. We've been able to distribute the wealth proceeds. But of course, there's the negative side to globalization. The penalty of a global marketplace is that all ill effects now occur on a global scale. And the current financial crisis is a crisis precisely because it is the first truly global malfunctioning. And let's be clear, its causes are not simply financial, but spiritual as well as moral. And as the near cardiac arrest of the financial system showed, it was right for governments to regulate markets appropriately and to intervene to mitigate the ill effects of markets when they malfunction. But that is not enough. The globalized economy is a fact. The persistence and vitality of religious faith is also a fact. So how does religious faith relate to globalization? In the first place, religious faith is an essential part of the global context in which we do business. The major corporations are employing more and more people of different faiths and working in contexts where faith is a central part of a person's identity and values. Since faith matters to people, it matters to markets. And up to now, we've lacked the grammar to discuss the issues of faith, and I believe we're only in the early stages of beginning to recover an unembarrassed, intelligent way of discussing the topic. And if I may pay a tribute to Tony Blair for the groundbreaking work in which he's been engaged in helping those with a voice to find a language that is accessible on this topic. Now, many suppose that the smooth functioning of the markets relies on individuals and businesses being self-interested and operating within the law. This is false. The smooth functioning of the market relies on trust, which includes an implicit commitment to a penumbra of norms above regulations and the law, and which arise out of relationships with other people, qua people. For global trade, these norms must apply to all peoples, regardless of religious, national, or other ethnic boundaries. Creating and sustaining a culture of trust depends on qualities of trustworthiness and forgiveness, which cannot be legislated for. Again, a vital issue. And if we do not recover a renewed commitment to trust, and by this I mean specifically a cooperative interdependence, we have no other place to go than to regulation, which has clearly continued to fail. And because our values have shifted from a culture of trust to a culture of self first, we are experiencing a crisis of trust resulting in the serious malfunctioning of the market. But faith can help as it articulates the values and provides the motivating spirit to generate and sustain a culture of trust in the marketplace. Thus, faith is not only compatible with globalization, it has a vital role to play in ensuring the very possibility of globalization. Now, it seems to me that people of religious faith have a unique opportunity in the present financial crisis to offer their values to the marketplace. It would be naive to pretend that people of religious faith are immune to corruption or greed. They're not. But for the most part, however, religious believers have failed to apply their faith to the marketplace. They've been encouraged in the past to leave their faith at home. It is too complex, too difficult. Don't get engaged. Yet if faith isn't relevant in the workplace, it isn't relevant at all. And the reality is that religious believers possess tremendous resources to promote exactly the sort of values that are required to rebuild solid foundations for the global economy. Religious believers are well placed to contribute to building up a marketplace concerned not only with producing goods and services, but to producing those things that really are good and of service. And this service ethic, the love of God and of neighbor, is central, albeit in different ways, to the world's great religions. Religion and the marketplace don't need to be kept apart. They belong together. Tony Blair has spoken about this himself. In his 2008 lecture at Westminster Cathedral, he said faiths can transform and humanize the impersonal forces of globalization and shape the values of the changing set of economic and power relationships of the 21st century. Religious faith can help us articulate values and provide a motivating spirit to generate and to sustain the culture of trust that is needed to be recovered in the marketplace if it is to continue to be effective. Now, the role that beliefs play in trust and that psychology plays in the marketplace has been highlighted in the recent book by George Akerlof and Robert Schiller called Animal Spirits. They argue that if we want to understand how economies work and how we can manage them and prosper, we must pay attention to animal spirits, thought patterns that animate people's ideas and people's feelings. We will never really understand important economic events, they argue, unless we confront the fact that they are caused by such all too human things as temptation, envy, resentment, and illusion. And this fresh approach, I think, needs to be considered seriously and welcomed, as it points to the importance of human psychology in driving the global economy. And Alan Greenspan, perhaps the most famous, if not distinguished, central bank governor of his generation, has indicated that the deep cause of our current financial crisis is to be found simply, or perhaps most complexly, in human nature. And on a very practical level, humanizing globalization is about the values and guides of our relationships in our workplaces. The health of our corporate relationships will reflect the health of how we relate as individuals to those around us. We are faced with the increasing emptiness, the self-centeredness, and the ruthlessness of the workplace. As profit has been seen to be the ultimate and freestanding end in itself for corporations, so individuals now see it as their personal end in itself. In rebuilding the economy, people of religious faith can remind us that shareholder value is not the principal aim of business. Rather, shareholder value is the outcome of a holistic, values-based corporation. And the current crisis has shown the imperative need to make the me to we shift. Now, as a banker for over 30 years in the city, I recognize that the single most important cause of this financial crisis is the breakdown of faith, of confidence, of trust between shareholders, the public, the corporations, the directors, the regulators, and the governments. We work, it is true, in order to survive. And when all goes well, our work creates wealth. But we also work each day for a purpose, and we work within trusting cooperative relationships. And what about the values of the workplace? What are the values that guide the relationships in our workplace? So my question is not just, is faith compatible with globalization? For it obviously is. My question is the deeper one. Can the global economy do without faith? Our wealth creation, important as it is, must be trammeled and indeed upheld by values that arise in the context of relationships to other human beings. These values arise as obligations that are due to others. They have the character of law, if you like. But it is the spirit that gives life, that enables us actually to live these values day to day and to work in cooperative interdependence with each other. And thus a culture of trust in the workplace is generated and sustained. So to conclude, the biggest single contributor to the crisis, the breakdown of trust. The greatest task we have, the rebuilding of trust. This is a Herculean task. It can only be taken step by step. It started with the need for apologies to be made, for the chairman of public banks to say sorry. It needs to be shown in the way in which the banks respond. But there is also a need for someone, whoever it is, to draw the line, to bring closure, or what theologians would call forgiveness, in order for us to move on. And one of the important facts for us is that to understand religious faith, to engage with religious believers, and to encourage people of religious faith to apply the values derived from their faith to the workplace is one of the critical issues of our time. Faith, in my view, is part of the future, and the future can be bright if we learn to understand it properly. It is not simply that faith is compatible with globalization, but that the global economy cannot do without it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this invitation and this introduction. As I have not much time, and it's a very deep topic, very deep, as you have seen and heard right now, let me just go straight to some of the points that I think that we have to tackle dealing with such a topic, not only from an Islamic perspective, but I think that as we are talking about religions and what was said is really also for me from within the Islamic tradition to say in which way there is a contribution to make here as from within religion, religious traditions, but also as a citizen in our society, in our world. I completely agree, and I think that something which is quite important is to start from the very beginning by saying that globalization is a fact. We cannot say, no, we are against globalization. We may be against the way it is, this kind of globalization, but globalization is a fact, and it will be completely useless to start by saying, no, we are against it. But we have to resist some of the trends and some of the qualification and characteristic of this globalization when it comes to the way it is now. You said something which is also quite important when it comes to globalization. It's also the connection between the world as it is and secularization. And I think it's quite important here to come to a very deep understanding of what we are talking about. Because the very deep understanding of the secularization process is not to distinguish only between religion and church and state. There is something which is deep here. It's the distinction between two authorities. The authority which is coming from on high, which is God's authority and the authority of the church, for example, and something which is a negotiated authority when it comes to people deciding for themselves. We distinguish authorities, but there is something which is sometimes very dangerous in the way we understand it, which is to distinguish between morality and actions and behavior. This was not the meaning of secularization. It's to distinguish authorities without distinguish the fact that in every single action we have to think about ethics, about morality. So this could be something which we have to reintegrate in our discussion, because the very problem that we are facing today is that we have people in the name of the distinction between two authorities, they are missing ethics in politics and ethics in economy. And what we need today is more ethics in politics. We all know about what is happening in our countries, but we also need more ethics in economy. We distinguish authorities, but it doesn't mean that we are distinguishing action and objectives. Objectives and ethics and values should be in our discussion. And this is the way today we have to come to the world of economy, where sometimes we have people completely obsessed with money, forgetting values and forgetting objectives. And they may come with a very wrong understanding of what secularization is all about. So this is a point where we have an important contribution to make. The second point is the way it is now in the world, an economic order now is we have the impression that there is no ethics and there is no morality, and this is where from religious traditions, but not only. Once again, I'm against anything which has to do with an alliance of religions against all the others. I would say that what we need today, and we have to build trust with all the people of conscience, of values, humanists, agnostic, atheist, and religious people who are able to come to the ground and to say, we do not accept a world where there is this obsession of money, and the global economic order is not putting the dignity at the center of our action. And I would say that this is where we have to work together, and this is where we have to reconcile this by saying what, and this is the fourth point, that what we need now is to stop talking about something which is a self-regulated free market. This is not working. We see now what this ideology is bringing to us. And I would say that we have to be critical, that we need rules, and we need to be quite clear about our objectives in the economic world, and as well as also in the political world, because I would say that there is a connection here between ethics in the political order as well as in the economic order. So there is something which is quite important, is also the parameters that we are using to say this is working well or not. The GDP, we know this is not new. The United Nations are talking about the Index of Human Development, and we have to come to something which is happiness, dignity, justice, are parameters on which we have to evaluate our system, not only the money, not only the GDP. And I think that means that there is something that we have to change in our mindset, in our way of dealing with things. And this is where we also have a contribution to make. We all know, and when you are dealing now with, the Muslim majority countries, Muslim scholars, Muslim economists, they are saying that Islam per se is resisting this economic order because we are against interest and we are against speculation. In itself, Islam is resisting this capitalist order by saying we have to put values. So we have instruments. And these instruments, when it comes to refusing riba, interest, and to try to find other ways, when we are against speculation and when we are promoting something which is zakat, which is the right of the poor people in our system, who should not be doubly victims because they are victims of our way of life, and now we are asking them to change their life to save ours. So this is something which is unacceptable. This is not showing anything which has to do with compassion and dignity and justice with the way we are dealing with people. So I would say here that we have all these instruments, but I have a problem very often when it comes to what is proposed and in which way we are proposing this. And this, I think, it's not only our contribution coming from religious traditions, but it's a responsibility. We come with values and we come with objectives, but very often when it comes to economy, we don't come with the competence. It's as if we are dreaming a world without having the means to change. And this is where we need now not only to come with our religious traditions, but competence, knowledge in how we can change this from within to reform the system. And I would say that very often, even when we come with this discussion, our relationship with economists, with people who have some dignity on this and they have a stand on that, we should be more working together in order to try to find ways, practical things, not to dream the future, but to change the present. And also to do this, we need all the competence to be together. So we need this economists to be with us and the people who are on the ground, because what we hear very often is economists telling us, it's too complicated for you. It's a very complicated world. And in the name of complexity, we don't change. So complexity, instead of pushing us to come with competence, are pushing us to be more passive. And the best way for technicists or people who are full of this, technical thing, the best way for them to put you in a situation that you cannot change is that, it's very complicated. And very complicated is the way of promoting status quo. And I would say that this is why I think that we have to stop only speaking about values, only speaking about objectives, but come to something which is applied ethics. How can we do this practically at the local level, at the national level, at the international level? When we have power, not only to come to this when we don't have power. It's quite important to have power. It's quite important to try to spread around and to empower the people at all the levels in the name of an economic philosophy, in the name of setting these objectives, but also promoting dignity, justice in a practical way. So I would say that and these are the two last points that I wanted to make, having studied this from within the Islamic tradition and also dealt with Christians at the grassroots level, Jewish partners at the grassroots level, Buddhists in India, where they were thinking about a way to promote ethical economy, ethical practices on the ground, I think that this is where we all have from within our tradition to try to promote something which is, as I said, an economic philosophy to deal with globalization, but to try to change it from within, and also to try to connect and to build trust with other traditions. And this is why, for example, I have a problem with some of the Muslims who are coming and say, you know what, we have an Islamic economy. We have an Islamic finance. I would say no, we have Islamic ethics in economy. We have Islamic ethics in finance. Why? Because Christian ethics, Jewish ethics, Buddhist ethics, humanist ethics are also having ethics in the same field. And this is where we can build alliance. There is not something which is a specific economy for the Muslims, a specific economy for the Christians. No, we have values and common values in the same field. This is where we have to build bridges. And this is quite important. The way you name things could help you to build bridges or not. To think that you have something which is a specific thing. And I think that the starting point is what are we talking about and in which way we tackle the issue. And I saw so many Christians at the grassroots level coming with the same values as mine, but not calling them Islamic, because they have values, and this is applied ethics in economy and finance. And I saw people with no God doing things that I would like Muslims to do in the name of values, in the name of dignity, in the name of justice. So we should not build kind of walls around our tradition, but to open up the universal dimension of our principles in the name of our tradition and in the name of competence. And this is where I think that lots of people in the world of economy could help us. They may not talk about God, but they may talk about the same values as us. They may say something else about their tradition, but they may come with the same objectives and talking about dignity. And this is where we have to work together. So I would say here that I'm quite concerned about what we are hearing today about ethical capitalism. It's just structural changing, cosmetic changing in our order. I would say that we have to be more radical than that. And this is where our contradiction is quite important. Let us say it from the beginning. If we want this to happen, there is something which is quite important. We are talking about technicalities and economy and money. But at the end of the day, if there is something which we can provide our societies with, it's something which is a very powerful spiritual message. We are not going to change economy if we don't change our mindset. We are not going to change economy if we are not going to change our habits. We are not going to change economy if we are not going to change our ways of life. So let us also say this. Economy should be but a mean and not an end. But to change this in a mean, we have to change our lives. And this is where the spiritual messages that we have in our tradition should be as powerful as this obsession with money. Because at the end of the day, what I heard from people in southern countries is, you know what, you are talking about money, but there is something which is missing in your way of life, which is the meaning and the quest for meaning. And I would say that this also is our philosophical contribution. Thank you.
Whenever vicars talk about money or the city, they're always suspicious, especially lefty vicars like me, because people are always conscious that they don't really understand the things that make for wealth creation. So instead of playing to that stereotype, I'd like to just start by quoting my agreement with the most right-wing person I can think of, who died 2 weeks ago in a nursing home in Virginia, and that's Irving Kristol. And he wrote a book, the great godfather of neoconservatism. And he wrote a book in the 70s, 78 I think it was, called 2 Cheers for Capitalism. And the 2 cheers for capitalism was cheer number 1, capitalism generates freedom, underpins freedom. Cheer number 2 is that capitalism is about wealth creation. But very significantly, Mr. Kristol withheld the 3rd cheer. And he withheld the 3rd cheer because, according to him, it also breeds a sort of value relativism, which also leads to a sort of cultural and spiritual nihilism. I want to say something about that absent 3rd chair and how that may be filled, just for, I've got about 1 minute to do it, which is rather tricky. I had a sermon when I was a student at university, the present Archbishop of Canterbury, and it was one of those sort of terribly personal sermons that you feel as a finger pointing right at you. And there's a question, he can sometimes frame questions beautifully, and the question he asked was, for whom is your money good news? And it was an absolutely terrific question, especially from a Christian perspective where good news is what we say we're about. For whom is your money good news? And it was almost as if you can tell what your values are, all of us. You can tell what your values are by going home and taking out your bank statement and seeing what you spend it on. That is where your values are revealed. For whom is your money good news? Now, capitalism is very good at generating wealth, but is it so good at distributing it? And is the good news of that wealth good news to all people? For whom, when I look from St. Paul's out at the city and see all of this wealth creation, for whom is it good news? And many of us suspect it's good news for far too few. Adam Smith famously said that there's this invisible hand, that if you work for your, as it were, the baker works for his own prosperity, then by this invisible hand, he will also work for the prosperity of others. Christianity has it almost the other way round, is that if you work for the prosperity of others, there is some invisible hand which will, as it were, do for you. Chaucer said something incredibly clever about Christ. He said, "A man there was, though some did think him mad, the more he gave away, the more he had." Now, I'm not talking about giving away, but that other-centeredness, that care for others, is actually something through an invisible hand which is good for us and good for our spiritual and moral welfare. So that third absent cheer that Crystal withheld from capitalism is one that we desperately need to address and desperately need to fill. And I think the question that starts that process, and I'm an amateur, I don't know anything about economics, but the question that starts for me is, for all of us, for whom is your money, for whom is my money good news?
Ken Costa said that we've had the first truly global malfunction. If you live in Rwanda, if you live in Gaza, if you live in Nepal, what's changed? We haven't had a global malfunction. We've had a global interruption of the economy, but the globalization hasn't spread globally. It's not truly true globalization. That is the biggest problem. We are trying to patch it up politically. We're patching up a financial crisis politically by trying to repair what there was before rather than facilitate growth of products and services that are needed now. It's a major political problem. It's a major ethical problem. The city, the capital markets, have done good things. They are a fantastic social equaliser. I went to a comprehensive school. My father worked in a factory, and I'm standing here with these eminent people. This would not have been possible in a different generation. The city has brought about innovation. It has fueled growth of the new low-carbon economy. If you look at the boards of the major charities based in London, they're populated by people from investment banks, by hedge funds, private equity funds, who are incredibly generous, but not all of them. Not all of them. There are some people in the markets who are slime balls, who are amoral or immoral. But don't lose sight, even within that context, that there are positives. One of the big impacts of the global downturn has been the decline in commodity prices. And I go back to Africa. Africa was a major beneficiary of the rise in commodity prices. I look at oil and Angola. I look at diamonds, I look at copper, I look at agricultural production in Burkina Faso. They are suffering a downturn in the commodity-rich parts of Africa. but they hadn't really experienced the benefits. One of the things that we should be doing, instead of backing large US, large UK, large European, Russian companies to go into developing countries and extract wealth, we should be backing the local entrepreneur to produce finished goods. We still aren't doing it. We still have trade sanctions in America. We still have trade sanctions in Europe. When we are struggling on $1 a day to live, we should be worrying about trade sanctions. In the meantime, it's an absolute disgrace. Now, one of the big problems is a fundamental political lie. It's GDP. I agree with an awful lot of Tariq Ramadan's speech. The lie of GDP is that GDP must grow. GDP per capita is important. Global GDP growth or national GDP growth is not. Who benefits from national GDP growth? Government, politicians, because it preserves big governments and gives a bigger role for government. Population explosion, and last year I heard the Dalai Lama saying the biggest threat to the global economy, the biggest threat to the world is population growth. GDP growth as a whole is good for government, but no one else. And it's the wrong metric from any standard and preserves a certain political control and a political hubris which we should be truly scared of because of the impact it can have on us. And to finish, Tariq mentioned we need action. We need action. I absolutely agree. There is a lot we can learn from the fundamentalist Christians in the Bible Belt in America, from the fundamentalist Muslims in Afghanistan. They do act on their beliefs. All of us with beliefs should act. It should not be acceptable for boards of large companies to delegate ethical decisions to a corporate and social responsibility group that reports into the company secretary, but whose real impact, as it could be in terms of quality and real substance of ethical decision, never gets pushed down to a company. The middle manager will not make the right decision if the middle manager has to make money. This can only be dealt with by regulation, and politics does not bring about big change. Big change comes from grassroots appeal, grassroots action. The challenge is not to ask the politicians to do something. The challenge for everyone in this room is to force the politicians to bring about change, to force ethical decision-making into politics, into boardroom, and into investment. Thank you.